At my son's will reading, they clapped. Clapped when his ex-wife was handed everything. Our house, his savings, all 40 years of our lives. And I, who bathed him, fed him, held his hand through 12 years of illness, was called the kind old caregiver. I smiled, but something inside me cracked. They thought I would just walk away, but they forgot. This house still has cameras, and my son left behind more than just memories. So what happens when the truth walks back into the room? They clapped when she took it all. The will had barely finished being read when the room filled with polite applause. Some even smiled. The lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, closed the leather folder with both hands, satisfied, like he'd just delivered a grand performance. I sat there, stiff in the third row, hands folded, heart silent. To them, it was just another family gathering, just more paperwork. But to me, that was my son's life on the table. My life, too. And I had just been erased from all of it. The house, the lake property, the brokerage accounts, even the '72 Gibson guitar he loved. All of it was handed over to Sienna, his ex-wife. The woman who walked out when he was first diagnosed. The woman who didn't show her face again until the very last week of his life. And me? I got a single mention. With gratitude for the kindness of Ellen Rourke, caregiver. Kindness. As if feeding him through a tube, cleaning his sheets, memorizing his medication schedule, holding his body through seizures for 12 years, was a kind gesture. Not love, not loyalty, just kindness. I smiled, not because I was happy, because that's the only thing I could do in that moment. My hands were trembling too much to speak. I saw her standing near the front afterward, surrounded by people I used to know. Distant cousins, Michael's college roommate, even a neighbor who barely nodded at me in the driveway. She hugged them one by one, accepting their sympathy like a widow in a black and white film. Her voice carried over the small crowd as she spoke about grief and resilience. She wore pearl earrings and said, "Michael always believed in giving second chances." People nodded like sheep. A few offered me a smile on the way out, the kind people give to a cashier who looks too tired. One of them patted my shoulder and said, "He always appreciated you." Then they followed the others to Sienna's SUV. I didn't follow. I stayed in the pew until the room emptied. The echo of their footsteps faded, and all that was left was me, a stack of printed programs, and the scent of old wood. I stood up slowly and made my way to the front. The folder still sat on the podium. I opened it. Pages were clipped neatly, signatures clean and official. The last page, the revised will, looked unfamiliar. I knew my son's signature. I had watched him struggle to sign birthday cards, shaking, gripping a pen like it was slipping through water. That signature on the page was too smooth, too firm. My stomach tightened. I closed the folder and left it exactly where it was. By the time I reached my car, Sienna's SUV was already gone. She was fast. Of course she was. Inside my car, I sat still. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took out my notebook from the glove box and wrote one line. Start with the signature. Because something wasn't right. And I wasn't going to let them bury it with him. You know, people always say older women should accept things gracefully, that we're lucky to be remembered at all, that we shouldn't cause trouble. But let me ask you something, not out loud, not in words, just in your heart. If your child left you with everything but the truth, would you stay quiet? Would you clap? Because I didn't. I drove straight home that afternoon. No dinner, no tea. I unlocked Michael's room, sat on his bed, and waited for the storm inside me to stop spinning long enough so I could find where to begin. The first place I looked wasn't a drawer or a box. It was the edge of his desk. Underneath, taped in the corner, was a flash drive I'd never seen before. That was the moment I stopped being a kind caregiver. That was the moment I remembered who I was. A mother. And they had made the mistake of thinking I was done. And you, listening now, I hope you stay with me, because what comes next is not soft, and it is not sweet, but it is true. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on Michael's bed, my coat still on, the ceiling fan spinning above me like it had 12 years ago, when he first came home from the hospital. Back then, the air in this room smelled like alcohol pads, ointment, and ginger tea. Now it was dry, hollow, like a room no one had dared breathe in since he died. The flash drive I found taped under the desk sat in the center of my palm, cold and smooth. It was labeled in his handwriting, Legal, Personal, MR. He must have written that months ago, maybe longer. He knew how bad things were getting. He knew someone might try something. I didn't wait for morning. I turned on the old laptop in the hallway closet, the one I used to track his medications and insurance paperwork. It hadn't been touched since his last hospital stay. The screen flickered a few times before booting up. The file loaded easily. Inside were scanned documents, audio recordings, and one video file simply titled Last Will, Michael. I didn't open the video. Not yet. Instead, I opened a folder labeled Sienna. Inside were screenshots of emails, forwarded messages from a Gmail account I didn't recognize, conversations between Sienna and a name I had never heard before, Whitaker L at cspfirm.com. There were threads with subject lines like time sensitive, witness unavailable, record late at night, and even one that read final version signature page only. It hit me all at once. Michael had been tracking them. He knew. I clicked on an audio file. His voice was weak, breathy. If Mum is listening to this, it means something went wrong. Sienna came back. She wants everything. She said she'd fight. I didn't trust her. I didn't sign the new version. If you're being told I did, check the date. Check the time. Look for Lorna. Lorna. That name I recognized. She was the night nurse during the last 2 weeks. She came in silent and left fast, never looked me in the eye. I paused the recording and wrote everything down. Date, file names, email headers, Lorna's name. I knew this house. I knew every drawer, every cabinet, every chipped tile. And I knew Michael. He didn't do anything halfway. If he left this for me, there was more. I went to the nightstand beside his bed. The drawer stuck, like always, swollen from years of humidity. I pulled harder. Inside was a folded piece of paper wrapped around a USB adapter, the kind that lets you connect old drives to newer devices. The note said, "Backup is mirrored on the Samsung Portable. Ask Jason if stuck." Jason. That was Michael's old college friend, the only one who still visited after the diagnosis. He worked in cybersecurity, the one who helped Michael encrypt his tax records when a bill got sent to the wrong address. I wasn't going to ask him. Not yet. I needed to know what I was holding first. The sun started rising through the blinds. My eyes burned, but I didn't care. I opened the second USB, this one shaped like a small silver key. This time, there were only 2 files. One was another copy of the same Last Will Michael video. The other was a text document, my original will.pdf. I opened it. It was clean, clear, dated 6 months ago, signed slowly, shakily, but unmistakably Michael's signature. And in it, he named me the sole beneficiary. He included a clause stating that in the event of any dispute or attempt to modify the terms while he was under medical care, His original will would take precedence, and a video statement would serve as supplementary evidence. That wasn't just careful, that was airtight. I sat back in the chair. My throat was dry, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. They thought I wouldn't check, that I wouldn't understand, that grief would drown out my sense. They didn't know I had watched my husband die, that I had lived through losing a daughter before Michael was even born, that I had memorized every corner of medical paperwork, every loophole in hospice care, every notary regulation. I looked again at the PDF. The signature on it didn't match the one Whitaker had shown in church. Not even close. Michael had never stopped protecting me, even when he couldn't move, even when he couldn't speak clearly. He left the truth right here, in our home. By the time the neighborhood started waking up, I had already copied everything to 3 different flash drives. One went into my safe, one went into the lining of my purse. The third would go to someone else. But not yet. I walked into the kitchen, made coffee, fed the cat, changed the sheets on Michael's bed, all with the quiet precision of someone planning something. That morning, I called the local courthouse and asked how to file a motion to freeze an estate transfer. I didn't tell them my name. I just asked for the form. Because the next time I saw Sienna, I wouldn't be sitting in the back row. I'd be standing at the front, and I wouldn't be clapping. I began with the signature. By mid-morning, I was already parked across from a small office complex on Hawthorne Street. The building was beige stucco, no signs on the glass door, just a mailbox with a faded label, Denton Forensic Services. I'd called earlier, spoke to a young woman named Raina. She told me their handwriting analyst was in that day, and if I could arrive before noon, they'd make time for me. I walked in carrying a file folder with 2 printed documents. One was the will Whitaker had read at the church. The other was the original Michael had saved on his flash drive. I didn't mention the video yet. I wanted to see their reaction to the signatures first. The office was quiet, smelled like old carpet and toner ink. Raina took the papers, glanced briefly, and said it would take a few hours. I paid up front and left my phone number. Outside, I sat in the car with the engine off, just listening. No music, just my breath and the occasional rattle of a passing truck. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't hopeful either. I was working from instinct now, and instinct told me that these people, Sienna and Whitaker, had underestimated the wrong woman. On the way home, I stopped at 3 places. First was the home of my neighbor, Martha. She lived 2 doors down, retired postal worker, kept her security cameras on 24/7 since someone stole a package off her porch 2 years ago. I'd seen the blue blinking light on her doorbell camera every night for years. She opened the door in her robe, surprised to see me. I didn't waste time. I asked her if she could help me check footage from the night before Michael's will was supposedly signed. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and opened her phone. It took less than 5 minutes. I remembered the date. I remembered the time. There it was. 1:15 in the morning. Sienna's car pulling into my driveway. A man getting out on the passenger side. He wore a sport coat and carried a briefcase. No visible name tag, but there was a moment, when the porch light flicked on, where I could freeze the frame. His hand was holding up a black folder, a seal pressed into the leather. Martha helped me export the video and sent me a copy. I thanked her, walked straight back to my car, and drove to the next stop. The second place was the hospice center. I didn't walk in through the main entrance. I went around back to the staff lot. That's where Lorna usually parked. Her shift always started around 7 in the evening. I waited in the car until I saw her step out at the end of her shift, keys in hand, hair tied up, same grey jacket she always wore. She didn't see me. I didn't speak to her. I only watched her get in the car and drive off. Then I walked inside. The front desk staff recognized me. I told them I needed a copy of the medication log for Michael Rourke, dated 2 weeks before his passing. They hesitated, said something about privacy. I reminded them that I was his legal medical proxy at the time. They checked, came back 10 minutes later with a manila envelope. I thanked them and left. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the file. My fingers ran along the dates and times. Everything was recorded: dosages, reactions, nurses on shift. The night Whitaker claimed Michael signed the new will, the logs showed something else entirely. Michael had been administered hydromorphone at 10:43 p.m. At 11:30 p.m., he was recorded as unresponsive to verbal prompts. No further entries until morning rounds at 6:12 a.m., which meant Michael could not have signed anything at 1:15 in the morning, not unless someone lifted his hand and made the pen move for him. I looked at the clip again, the man with the briefcase, the seal, the time. It all lined up, and it all pointed to one thing. This was not a clerical error. This was fabrication, deliberate, coordinated, and that left only one more piece to prepare. I opened Michael's laptop, the one I had stored away during his last hospital stay. I powered it on and plugged in the silver USB. The video played without glitches. Michael sat upright in his bed, frail, but alert. His voice was low, but clear. "If this is being shown," he said, "it means someone has tried to override my will. I did not authorize any changes after June. My mother, Ellen Rourke, is my only legal heir. This video is to supplement the original signed copy. I do not trust Sienna Crowell. I do not trust Lewis Whitaker. They are not to handle my estate." He paused to breathe. His hand trembled as he adjusted the camera. This was filmed at home, alone. No one else present. No pressure. No influence. Just me. And this is my decision. He looked into the camera for a few seconds. Then he nodded once. The screen went dark. I sat in silence. No tears, no panic. I clicked to create 3 backup copies, labeled them clearly. Now I had the will, the medical log, the video statement, and the footage from the door camera. Each piece said the same thing: Michael never meant for Sienna to have anything. I looked at the clock. It was just past 4 p.m. I still had time. I picked up the phone and called First Hill United Church, the same place they'd read the fake will. I asked if the sanctuary was available for a memorial event that Saturday. Something simple, in Michael's name. The woman said yes. I gave her my name, and I said there would be a video to play at the end. Something he wanted the whole world to see. I didn't wait. The very next morning, I put on my best navy coat, the one Michael once said made me look like I was about to fire someone. I pulled my hair into a clip, took my leather purse, and drove down to First Hill United Church. The parking lot was empty except for one maintenance truck. The sky hung low and grey, like it might rain, but hadn't decided yet. It suited the day. Inside, the sanctuary still held that faint scent of hymn books and old wood polish. The woman at the front desk was kind. She remembered me from the will reading. She didn't ask questions when I said I wanted to book the space for a private memorial, just nodded and opened a scheduling binder. Saturday afternoon was free. I gave her the time, 3 o'clock. I said we would need a microphone, a projector, and an HDMI cord to connect a laptop. She said that was no problem. I handed her a small envelope with a deposit. She offered me condolences again. I didn't respond. Not because I was rude, because I couldn't stomach hearing another empty phrase like that. Not after what had happened in that very room. I left without lingering. On my way out, I stopped by the podium. I stood exactly where Whitaker had stood 4 days earlier. I looked out over the empty pews. In that silence, I remembered the sound of applause, how it echoed, how it landed on me like gravel. This time, it would be different. I spent the next 2 days preparing like it was a trial. In a way, it was. Not in a courtroom, but in front of every person who had clapped for Sienna. Every friend, cousin, co-worker, neighbor. Every bystander who had watched me be erased with a polite smile. They would all be invited, and they would all see the truth. First, I went to the printers and had 25 invitations made. Cream cardstock, gold trim, just enough elegance to get attention, not so much that it seemed suspicious. On the front, I wrote, "A remembrance of Michael Rourke, his words, his wishes, his truth." Inside, the time and location, a note about light refreshments afterward, and a line at the bottom, "A video message from Michael will be shared." Then I mailed them, hand-delivered a few, slipped one under Sienna's front door. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to feel safe enough to show up. Next was the video. I re-watched Michael's statement 3 more times, carefully checking the audio, making sure nothing would glitch. I trimmed the front to remove the setup, just left the clean opening with his face and voice. I didn't touch the ending. His silence there was more powerful than anything I could say. I saved it to 2 flash drives, one for the church system, one backup in my coat pocket. Then came the slideshow. It took me a full night, 12 years of photos, not curated, not filtered, raw pictures. Me, helping Michael into his wheelchair, Michael smiling through his oxygen mask, his hand gripping mine in the hospital. Grocery lists on the fridge in my handwriting, the armchair he refused to replace, his cat asleep on his legs. Not a single photo of Sienna during those years. The last image would be that still frame from the porch camera, Sienna standing next to the man with the black briefcase. The timestamp glowing clear in the corner. It would be the final image before the video played. I didn't need music. I didn't need dramatic transitions. I needed facts, presented like quiet thunder. By Friday night, everything was packed. Laptop, drives, cables, printed copies of Michael's medical log, a folder of screenshots from the emails, and the original will, printed on thick white paper. Michael's signature at the bottom, shaky but deliberate. I made tea, sat on the couch, and looked out the window. The street was still. The lights on the neighbor's porch flickered. I thought about what Michael might say if he were here. He wouldn't tell me to stop. He would probably ask if I'd checked the batteries in the projector remote. I slept in my clothes that night, woke up early, ironed my collar, packed an extra scarf. At noon, I called the church, confirmed everything. They had the HDMI ready, the mic checked, the projector tested. Chairs would be arranged by 2. They asked if I needed help setting anything up. I said I was fine. By 2:30, I stood outside the sanctuary, watching cars pull in. They came. More than I expected. Former co-workers, people from Michael's old support group, a few cousins I hadn't seen in years, even a former neighbor who brought a tray of brownies. They walked in quietly, nodded, took programs. At 2:50, Sienna arrived. She wore all black, sunglasses. Her husband wasn't with her. She walked in alone, clutched her purse like she was entering a courtroom. I greeted her with a nod. She didn't return it. Just found a seat in the 3rd row, not far from where I had sat before. At exactly 3 o'clock, I stepped up to the podium. I thanked them for coming, told them this wasn't a funeral. It wasn't a legal proceeding. It was a moment to hear from Michael, his voice, his words. I didn't mention the will. I didn't accuse. I just let the slideshow begin. Image after image moved across the screen. No music, just silence and slow truth. Faces in the audience shifted. Some bowed their heads, some leaned forward. I watched Sienna. She stared at the screen, jaw tight, not blinking. And then came the final image. The porch camera, her figure, the man, the seal, the timestamp. Gasps, whispers. A few turned toward her. She didn't move. Then the screen went black, and Michael's voice began to speak. Michael's voice filled the sanctuary. It was quiet at first, breathy, almost fragile. But the microphone picked it up clearly. His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was steady, tired maybe, but sharp, like a man who had waited too long to be heard. "If you're listening to this," he said, "then something went wrong." The room went still. People sat upright in their seats. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector. "I didn't sign a new will," Michael continued. "I made my decisions 6 months ago. I filed them properly. I told the people I trusted. I asked my mother to keep my documents safe. I left a copy of this video on a secure drive. And if someone is reading you something else, I need you to know. It isn't mine." Somewhere in the second row, a woman gasped. A man cleared his throat. No one dared move. Michael's image on the screen was clear, though the lighting in the room where he filmed was dim. He sat in bed, propped up on pillows, wearing a grey shirt with the collar stretched loose. His hair was thinner, his cheeks hollow, but his eyes were direct. "I don't trust Sienna Crowell," he said. "I don't trust Lewis Whitaker. If they are speaking on my behalf, they are not speaking with my consent." Sienna shifted in her seat. I saw her jaw clench. She reached for her bag, hesitated, then froze again. Michael went on. "This isn't about revenge. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I just want my words to matter, even if I'm not around to speak them. I want my mother to be treated fairly. She gave me 12 years of her life. She carried me through every surgery, every bad scan, every long night. She deserves more than to be forgotten in a folder. If my voice means anything, let it mean this. She is the one I chose, no one else." The video ended without music. No fade to black, just silence. I stepped forward and turned off the projector. No one applauded. That wasn't the kind of moment it was. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Some looked down. Others looked toward Sienna. She kept her head low, hands folded tight in her lap. I stood at the podium again. I didn't need to say much. The video had done what it needed to do. But I had one last piece. I pulled the microphone closer. "I have copies of everything you just saw," I said. "The original will, the medical logs from the night they claimed he signed a new document, footage from a neighbor's security camera, and this video, recorded in Michael's own voice, in his own room, on his own terms. I will be presenting all of it to the probate court next week." I let that settle. If any of you had doubts, now you know. And if anyone supported a lie, that choice is theirs to carry. Then I stepped away. People didn't leave right away. Some sat for several minutes, lost in thought. A few came to hug me quietly. Others shook my hand. Most walked past Sienna without a word. She stayed seated until the room was almost empty. Then she stood, adjusted her coat, and walked quickly out the side door. She didn't look back. By the time I finished packing up the laptop and flash drive, the sanctuary was quiet again. The air felt different, not lighter, just honest. I drove home in silence, no radio, no thoughts I could put into words, just the road and the sound of gravel under the tires. That night I made tea, sat at the kitchen table with the light off. I looked through Michael's file folder again, not because I needed to, just to feel closer to him, his handwriting, his planning, the care he had taken to leave everything in order. He had trusted me, not just as his mother, but as the one who would carry his truth after he was gone. The next morning I emailed my attorney. I attached the documents, the video, and a timeline of events. I told her I was ready to challenge the reading of the false will. She responded an hour later, said it would move quickly given what I had. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. By afternoon, I received a message from someone who had been at the church, a former nurse who'd cared for Michael during his second hospital stay. She wrote that she had always felt something was off about Sienna's sudden return, that now, watching the video, she understood. People talk. That's the nature of small towns. But this time, I didn't mind. Because the truth wasn't mine to hide. It belonged to Michael. And now, finally, it belonged to everyone. That night, I folded the invitation from the memorial and placed it into a box with the video drive, the signed will, and the photograph of us taken the spring before he passed. We were sitting on the porch, sunlight on our faces. He looked tired, but content. I had my hand on his knee. I wrote a label on the box. Proof, in case they ever try again. Then I put it away, high on the shelf in my bedroom closet, behind the extra linens, and I waited for the next move, because I knew they wouldn't stay quiet for long, and neither would I. By Sunday morning, the ripple had already started. People talk, but people also listen, especially when what they heard the day before didn't match what they had been told 4 days earlier. My phone rang 3 times before noon. 2 were from cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. The third was from Carol Bennett, a woman who used to run Sunday school with me 20 years ago. She called just to say she believed me. Then she cried. I listened, thanked her, and hung up. But I wasn't sitting still. That morning, I drove to the probate clerk's office and dropped off a full copy of Michael's video will, the medical logs from his hospice file, and a letter from my attorney requesting an injunction against the disbursement of any funds or property named in the false will. We marked it as urgent. Attached were receipts for the certified mailing of evidence to both Whitaker's office and Sienna's address. They would know by Monday morning that the challenge was real, formal, and no longer quiet. I spent the rest of the day scanning every document again, saving new backups on cloud drives under anonymous names. My mind had shifted out of grief. Now it was focused. Every move I made had to be solid, deliberate. There would be no margin for error. At dusk, I sat in Michael's old room. His photos still lined the shelf above his desk. I hadn't moved them. One of them showed him at 25, standing on a hiking trail in Oregon, wind in his hair, arms wide. He looked invincible. I stared at that photo for a long time, thinking about how life had folded him down, inch by inch, and how he had still found a way to leave behind a voice strong enough to echo after death. That night, I packed a bag. Just a small one, because Monday, I planned to show up in person. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked into Whitaker's law office. I didn't call first. I didn't need an appointment. I walked up to the front desk and asked to see him. The receptionist blinked at me, then asked my name. Ellen Rourke, I said. She tapped something on her screen, then asked me to wait. The waiting room was cold. White chairs, white walls, one potted plant by the window. I sat down with my purse in my lap. 2 other people were across the room, flipping through magazines. 10 minutes passed. Then a door opened. Whitaker stepped out, eyes immediately scanning until they landed on me. His face didn't change, but his posture did. He stood straighter, adjusted his tie, and walked toward me with a forced smile. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, voice smooth, "what brings you in today?" I stood, calm, measured. "I came to deliver something in person." He gestured toward the hallway. "We can speak in my office." I followed him past a row of closed doors into a corner room with a window view. It was modern, clean. There was a stack of folders on his desk, 2 legal pads, a nameplate that read Lewis Whitaker, Escalating. He sat behind the desk and waited. I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder in front of him. "That's a copy of the injunction filed with probate. You should expect a formal notice this afternoon," I said. "There's also the video file Michael recorded. I assume you've already seen it." His hand hovered over the folder but didn't open it. I watched his jaw work, just a slight movement. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Rourke," he said slowly, "I understand this has been a difficult time." I didn't respond. He tried again. "Emotions are high. Misunderstandings can happen. Sometimes memories—" I held up a hand. "No." He stopped speaking. "You and I both know what this is. You filed a falsified will. You used a notary who has been deceased for 3 years. You allowed that document to be read in a church, in front of family, as if it were legitimate. And you stood there while my son's real wishes were erased." His face didn't change, but the silence grew heavier. "You can deny it to me," I said. "You can spin whatever story you want in court, but you can't change the fact that Michael left a record, and now that record is in front of a judge." He exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, "this kind of litigation can be disruptive." I smiled without humor. "It's already disrupted," I said. I turned to leave. Before I reached the door, he spoke again. "You'll damage your son's legacy by dragging this out." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. Then I turned. He built that legacy with both hands while his body was falling apart, and he trusted me to protect it. "You think this is damage? I think it's defense." I left without waiting for a response. In the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel and breathed in, long to steady. The next stop was the notary board. I had already filed a report online the day before, but I wanted to speak to someone. I handed over the photocopy of the signature log used in the forged will. The receptionist took it and nodded grimly when she saw the name and number listed. "That seal was retired in 2019, she said. "The holder passed away. We'll open an investigation." I thanked her. I went home, changed my clothes, made a list of everyone who had been present during the original will reading. I planned to contact them all, not to convince them, just to let them know there would be a correction. A public one. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about stripping away every lie they had built and leaving nothing for them to hide behind. That evening, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find a courier standing there, holding a thick envelope. It was from Sienna's attorney. Inside was a letter, stiff, formal, stating that their client would contest the injunction and file a motion to uphold the original reading of the will. I read it once, then folded it. Then I sat at the kitchen table, opened a new file on my laptop, and began outlining a statement of rebuttal. The only thing louder than their denial was the sound of it unraveling, and I would be the one to finish the job. The following Thursday, the courthouse hearing was scheduled. It wasn't a trial, not yet. But it was the first formal review of the emergency injunction I'd filed, and it would be the first time Whitaker and I would stand in the same room under the eye of a judge. It was also the first time Sienna Mjegi would have to answer for what she had taken. She didn't know it yet, but everything she had built on that forged will was about to come undone. I arrived early. My attorney, Clara Mendoza, met me on the courthouse steps. She was younger than I'd expected when we first spoke on the phone, but sharp and calm in a way that told me she knew how to make people nervous without raising her voice. She wore a navy suit and carried a flat black portfolio with every file we had submitted over the past week. I carried nothing. That was her role now. Mine was to be steady. We walked into the probate courtroom together. It wasn't a large space. About 20 pew-style benches lined the center, polished oak that creaked when people sat. A bailiff Sardizim stood at the door. The judge had not yet entered. Sienna arrived second. She wore all beige, blouse, slacks, heels, and dark glasses, even though we were indoors. Her attorney followed close behind, a tall man with a clipped grey beard and a tired expression. They sat together on the opposite side of the aisle and didn't look at me. Clara leaned over and spoke softly. "They're trying to appear composed. That tells me they know how thin their ground is." I didn't nod. I didn't need to. Whitaker came in last. Alone. No assistant, no coat. Just a briefcase and a phone he refused to stop looking at. He took a seat 2 rows behind Sienna and adjusted his cuffs. Not once did he look up. At 9 on the dot, the clerk stood and called the room to order. The judge, a man named George Lyman, entered from the side door. He was in his 60s, clean-shaven, with an even tone, and the kind of face that could belong to a funeral director or a high school principal. He sat without ceremony and opened a file in front of him. "We're here today to hear arguments on the temporary injunction filed against the execution of the will of Michael Rourke. Counsel, state your appearances." Clara stood and introduced us. Sienna's lawyer did the same. Whitaker was noted as present, but not representing anyone officially. That was important. He was now a witness, not an advocate. Judge Lyman looked at the 2 attorneys and then turned to Clara. "You may proceed." She rose, stepped forward, and began without notes. "Your Honor, we are here to prevent a fraud from being finalized. The petitioner, Mrs. Ellen Rourke, has provided evidence that the will read publicly last week was not signed by her son, Michael Rourke, under legal or conscious capacity. We have supplied verified medical logs showing he was under the influence of heavy medication during the alleged signing. We have video footage showing a late-night meeting between the respondent and a man carrying documents, later identified by the petitioner as Louis Whitaker. The notary's signature on the revised will matches that of a notary who passed away 3 years ago. In addition, we have submitted a video testimony from the deceased, Michael Rourke, naming his mother as his sole beneficiary and explicitly rejecting the authority of both Ms. Crowell and Mr. Whitaker. She paused just long enough to let the weight of her words settle, then continued. "We are requesting that the court maintain the injunction to stop the execution of the contested will until a full evidentiary hearing can be held. We believe the current will is not just invalid, but criminally fabricated." The judge looked to Sienna's attorney. He stood, cleared his throat, and began his reply. "Your Honor, while we understand the petitioner's grief, we believe her claims are based on speculation and emotional distress. The document in question was witnessed, dated, and filed in good faith by a certified legal team. My client, Ms. Crowell, was named as sole beneficiary in accordance with Mr. Rourke's updated instructions. As for the medical records, we request additional time to review their validity. The video submitted by the petitioner, while moving, is not a legally binding document under state law unless accompanied by specific notarized instructions." Clara stood again before the judge could speak. May I respond briefly, Your Honor? He nodded. Clara tapped her portfolio and withdrew a printed sheet. This is a copy of the legal provision under Revised Probate Statute 61-3. It states that a supplemental video statement, if verified, can serve as corroborating testimony when questions of undue influence or forgery arise. Furthermore, the original, will dated 6 months prior to the revised document, matches the language and intent expressed in the video. She placed the paper on the bench. Everything aligns, Your Honor. The documents, the timeline, the audio. The law supports our position. Judge Lyman took the paper, read it silently, then looked at Sienna's lawyer. He didn't speak. The judge turned toward Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, you're here as a witness. Do you have anything to add? Whitaker stood. His voice was quieter than usual. No, Your Honor, not at this time. That was the moment I knew he was folding. The judge folded his hands and looked out across the courtroom. I'm granting the injunction, he said. Effective immediately, all transfers related to the contested will are to be frozen. No sale, distribution, or reallocation of any assets is to take place until the evidentiary hearing. He looked at both sides. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. I suggest both parties prepare accordingly. The clerk called the room to rise as Judge Lyman exited. Sienna stood slowly. Her face was blank, but her eyes were cold. She didn't speak. Her attorney whispered something to her, and they walked out through the side exit. Whitaker followed, but slower. As he passed by our bench, he paused, just briefly. Then he kept walking. Clara turned to me. That was the first wall. I nodded. I could feel it too. This wasn't just about halting a false document. This was about momentum, the kind that didn't stop once it started rolling. We walked out together, the courthouse door closing behind us. The sky was brighter than when we came in. The air carried something different. Not victory, not yet. But something solid. Like justice beginning to stand up. I didn't wait for the next move. I made it myself. 3 days after the judge granted the injunction, I walked into the newsroom of the local paper, a folded manila envelope tucked under my arm. The building was nothing special, an old storefront that had once been a pharmacy, but the people inside still cared about facts. That mattered now more than ever. The receptionist asked my name, and I gave it plainly. I told her I wasn't looking for publicity. I was looking for truth. She called someone down, a young reporter named Leah Stanford, who had been covering local probate disputes and elder law issues for a few years. Leah shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and invited me upstairs. In a small office filled with notebooks and framed headlines, I laid the envelope on the table. Inside were printed copies of Michael's original will, the medical log from the night of the forged signature, a screenshot of the porch footage showing Sienna with the man holding the notary seal, and a transcript of Michael's video statement. I left out the flash drive. That would go directly to the court. Leah read every word, carefully, slowly. She didn't interrupt. When she finished, she looked up at me and nodded once. You're not exaggerating, she said. No, I said. And I'm not finished. I told her the hearing was set for the following week, that the court had already frozen the estate, that Sienna and her lawyer were moving to defend a document backed by a notary who had been legally deceased for over 3 years. I told her about Whitaker and the unanswered questions around his role. She asked if she could quote me. I said no, but I gave her permission to publish the documents with redacted names. Let the public read it for themselves. Let them decide what it looked like. 2 days later, the article was printed. The headline wasn't dramatic. It was clear, measured. Dispute over late Rorke's estate raises questions of legitimacy. Underneath, a subheading in bold: Forgery allegations spark legal challenge and community concern. It ran alongside a still from the video of Michael's statement, blurred just enough to protect his face, but with the subtitle printed underneath: I did not sign a new will. By noon, my phone rang 5 times. Not from family, not from reporters, from strangers. People who had lost someone and been cut out. People who had cared for a dying parent only to be sidelined by paperwork signed under pressure. They didn't ask for advice. They just said they understood, that they were watching. I didn't respond to the calls. I saved the messages. I focused on what came next. The pressure shifted almost overnight. Sienna's lawyer filed a motion to suppress the video statement, citing lack of procedural authentication. Clara responded the same day with 2 expert affidavits, including a digital forensics specialist, confirming the file's metadata matched the recording timeline and location. The court accepted it for review. But the biggest shift came when a second notary came forward. An anonymous tip had led the probate office to review every recent filing submitted by Whitaker's firm. In doing so, they uncovered a pattern of inconsistencies: timing, witnessing, missing physical seals. That triggered something deeper. The state licensing board opened an investigation into Whitaker's practice. Within 48 hours, his name was pulled from the firm's public roster. He remained a named party in the case, but now as a potential respondent, not just a witness. His office voicemail stopped accepting messages. His website redirected to a maintenance page. And still, I kept going. Clara and I prepared a second round of filings, a motion to formally validate the original will and disqualify the forged one on grounds of fraud, duress, and notarial misconduct. It was more than paperwork now. It was a full map of what had been done, how it was carried out, and who had stood to benefit. We gathered screenshots from Whitaker's email headers, provided by Michael's backup drive. We confirmed that the emails about after-hours documentation and signature isolation strategy had come from his verified account. We linked them to the date the porch camera caught him arriving at the house. The connection was complete. There was nothing left for them to claim except delay. And delay was exactly what Sienna tried next. Her new motion, filed late on a Friday, requested an indefinite stay of proceedings, citing emotional distress and reputational harm. Clara called it for what it was: a stall tactic. She filed an objection on Monday morning and attached 4 prior cases where similar tactics had been dismissed when strong evidence of forgery was present. The judge didn't need time to decide. The motion was denied the same afternoon. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I sat at the kitchen table, stared at the list Clara had drawn up, the one that marked each key turn in the case, and I underlined the next date. The evidentiary hearing was 5 days away. I knew what it would feel like to walk into that courtroom again. I had done it once. I knew the way the light came through the windows at 10 in the morning. I knew the sound the benches made when people shifted in their seats. I knew what Sienna's perfume smelled like. I knew the precise look on Whitaker's face when he realized he no longer held the narrative in his hand. But this time, I wouldn't be the only one walking in with proof. This time, every lie they had stitched together was unraveling thread by thread, in full view of the people they had tried to fool. And I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to finish what Michael started. With documents, with facts, with silence where they had shouted. The kind of silence you don't recover from. The kind that stays. The hearing room was full before the clock struck 10. It wasn't just the usual handful of attendees this time. Word had spread. The article, the court filings, the screenshots that had made their way online. People came not to be entertained, but to understand how something like this could happen in plain sight. And some came to see if the truth would actually land. Clara and I arrived early again. She wore charcoal grey this time, crisp and clean, the same black portfolio in hand. She didn't bring a laptop. Everything that mattered had already been submitted. Today was about presence, about clarity, about keeping the pressure exactly where it belonged. Sienna sat at her usual spot across the aisle. Her eyes were heavily lined. She wore a black turtleneck and blazer, as if dressing for sympathy. Her attorney beside her looked worn down, flipping through a stack of papers with slow, robotic hands. Neither of them looked back at the crowd. Whitaker sat alone, one row behind them. He had no documents in front of him, no briefcase, just a yellow legal pad and a pen. His suit looked a size too large now. His hair was slightly uncombed. He stared straight ahead, like someone waiting for the last bus out of town. The judge entered through the side door. The clerk called the room to order. Everyone stood. Then we sat. Judge Lyman opened the folder in front of him. His voice was calm, but carried weight. This is a continuation of the matter of Rourke v. Crowell, concerning the contested estate of Michael Rourke. Today's hearing will focus on evidentiary review, including authentication of documents, timeline of events, and challenges to the credibility of signatures and testimonies previously submitted. He looked across both sides of the aisle. I expect clarity. I expect efficiency. Begin. Clara stood. She walked slowly toward the front, no notes in hand, just the same clear focus I'd seen since the first meeting. Your Honor, she said, what we bring today is not accusation. It is not theory. It is not interpretation. What we bring is alignment. Documents, timestamps, metadata, third-party verification. Everything points to a single conclusion. She stepped aside and gestured toward the display screen set up by the clerk. Exhibit A, Michael Rourke's original will, dated 6 months before the contested version. Signed by him, witnessed in accordance with the law, and verified by his primary physician and hospice care coordinator. The document appeared on screen. Clara didn't pause. Exhibit B, the revised will, submitted by Ms. Crowell through Mr. Whitaker. We note the notary stamp used on this version belonged to a deceased notary whose seal expired in 2019. This signature has been reviewed by 2 forensic handwriting experts, both concluding it is inconsistent with Mr. Rourke's handwriting and shows signs of guided movement. Another file clicked open. Then came the audio. Michael's voice from the video played just loud enough to fill the room. I did not sign a new will. Then silence. The judge made a note. Clara continued. Exhibit C, hospice medical logs from the night the signature was allegedly captured. Mr. Rourke was recorded as unresponsive after administration of hydromorphone. Staff notes confirm no lucid verbal response or motor coordination during the hours in question. The courtroom remained still. No coughing, no shuffling of papers. Just eyes locked on the evidence, step by step. Exhibit D, camera footage captured from the porch of a neighbor adjacent to the Rourke residence. Time-stamped, labeled. It shows Ms. Crowell arriving with an unidentified man, matching the physical description of Mr. Whitaker, holding a black portfolio and entering the residence at 1:13 a.m. The still image displayed next. Clara's voice held steady. Exhibit E, metadata report from a certified digital forensic analyst confirming the video statement made by Mr. Rourke was recorded in his home 2 weeks prior to his death and saved to a drive with no external modifications. She stopped, looked to the judge. Your Honor, taken individually, these pieces tell a troubling story. But taken together, they present one that is unmistakable. The judge nodded slowly. You may be seated. Then he turned. Counsel for Ms. Crowell, your response. Sienna's attorney stood. He looked tired. His collar was slightly rumpled. His voice was quiet. Your Honor, we request the court consider the emotional context of this case. The revisions to the will were made under stress, perhaps without full communication between parties. We question the admissibility of the video under current probate code and request additional time to provide counter-testimony. Judge Lyman did not nod. He looked directly at the attorney. You've had over a week. Do you have counter-testimony today? The man hesitated. No, Your Honor. Silence. The judge turned to Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, do you wish to offer sworn testimony in defense of your role in submitting the revised will? Whitaker looked up. The first time that day, he seemed to see the room around him. He stood. No, Your Honor. Do you deny the involvement outlined in the petitioner's filing? Whitaker swallowed. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. Murmurs swept through the crowd. The judge lifted his hand. Silence returned. Very well. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. This court finds sufficient grounds to declare the revised will submitted on behalf of Ms. Crowell as invalid due to forgery and improper notarization. The original will, dated and verified, shall be reinstated as the sole binding document of Mr. Rourke's estate. He paused. The court will issue findings in writing within 48 hours. Probate may resume under the valid terms. This matter is concluded. The gavel didn't slam. He just closed the file. The clerk called the court to rise. I stood, steady. Clara nodded at me once. As we gathered our things, Sienna remained seated. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispered something, but she didn't respond. Her face was still. Her hands trembled in her lap. Whitaker had already left. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered, the sky flat and overcast. I took a deep breath, not out of relief, out of acknowledgement. The truth had finally been spoken out loud, in public, in front of everyone they had fooled. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight begin to lift from my chest. Not because justice had landed, but because it had landed in front of witnesses. By the time October rolled around, the trees outside my window had started turning that golden, aching shade that always reminded me of my late husband. I could hear the rustling of leaves as I stirred my tea, but inside me, nothing was still. Not after the decision I had made. I had spent weeks combing through legal files, tax records, board meeting minutes, and the trust fund documents I had once let Jeffrey handle without question. And now, I had one final act left before the entire puzzle could lock into place. On a rainy Monday afternoon, I invited Jeffrey and Darla to the restaurant. Not to the downtown flagship, but to the very first one I had ever opened, back when it was just a 20-seat diner off the interstate. The air still smelled faintly of bacon and strong coffee. I had arranged for all employees to be off that day, and I sat at the corner booth where I used to do the books late at night, when Jeffrey was still a toddler asleep in the back room. They arrived together, of course. Jeffrey wore a navy sport coat like he was heading into a shareholders' meeting. Darla clung to his arm, dressed like she had something to prove. She gave me a practiced smile. That was new. Usually she didn't bother. Jeffrey slid into the booth without a greeting, his phone still in his hand. I waited a moment, then laid the folder on the table between us. He looked at it, then at me. I told them we would be closing the books on the business today, but this wouldn't be the kind of handover they were expecting. Jeffrey raised an eyebrow. Darla shifted in her seat. I opened the folder slowly and removed the signed documents, dated, notarized, filed, and backed by an ironclad team of attorneys I had carefully assembled. I explained that all the restaurants, the brand, the land, the licenses, the equipment, everything I had built over 4 decades had been placed into an irrevocable charitable trust. It would now be operated as a non-profit foundation. The earnings would no longer go into anyone's pockets, not Jeffrey's, not Darla's, not even mine. The new board was composed of people I had spent the last 6 months interviewing quietly. Airport employees, single mothers, culinary students, veterans' widows, women over 50 who had been pushed out of the workforce too early. Not one of them was related to me. That was intentional. Jeffrey sat in stunned silence. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. I went on. I told them about the scholarships the foundation would now fund, the culinary school for women over 40, the food program at VA hospitals, the community kitchen for out-of-work airline workers, the mobile food units for domestic abuse survivors. Darla muttered something under her breath. I kept speaking. I told them the last payroll with their names on it had already been processed, and that their severance packages had been calculated according to state law, modest but fair. The trust had no legal obligation to them anymore. It had never needed to. I paused for a long moment and looked at my son. I reminded him of the first time he helped me serve a table. He was 8 years old, and he dropped the syrup bottle on a customer's shoe. I remembered how he apologized twice, then cried behind the counter when the woman smiled and gave him a $5 tip anyway. I told him I didn't know when the boy who cried had turned into the man who forged my signature. He looked down at the table. Darla, always more shameless than smart, scoffed and asked what this meant for the penthouse condo and the SUV lease and the boardroom titles. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I handed her the document listing their name removals from all corporate access, bank authorizations, and operating agreements. I let her read the notary seal. The ink was barely dry. Jeffrey finally spoke. He asked if this was revenge. I told him it wasn't. It was correction. It was reclamation. It was the sound of me closing a door I should have never left open that wide in the first place. They didn't stay long after that. Darla hissed something to Jeffrey as they walked out. His shoulders were hunched in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager who crashed my minivan into a snowbank. Once they were gone, I stayed in the booth for a while, listening to the soft rattle of the old HVAC vent. Then I got up and locked the door behind me. That evening, I drove out to the bluff near the old municipal airfield where my husband used to take me to watch planes land. I parked and sat in silence, letting the wind curl around the car. I felt no elation, no smugness, only space. A sudden, quiet space inside me where grief used to sit. Back home, I opened the drawer by my bed and removed the last envelope from the lawyer. Inside was the official foundation charter and the letter of transfer for the last restaurant property, my personal favorite, the one near the military base where we used to host Thanksgiving dinners for lonely airmen. I stared at that letter for a long time, then folded it back neatly. I didn't cry. I had already done enough of that. What I felt now was something else. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even peace. It was steadiness. I was steady again, and I knew, deep in my bones, that steadiness would carry me through the rest of this journey. I wasn't done yet, not quite. But I was finally walking on ground that belonged to me again, and no one, not even my son, could take that away now. The private dining room at the Winding Cedar was bathed in amber light. Soft piano music curled through the air like smoke from a distant fire. The long oak table had been set with pristine white linens, crystal water goblets, and name cards in gold script. My name was printed in the center, between Grant and McClellan. It looked like something out of a luxury magazine spread. But I didn't come for the decor. I came for the ending. Mine. McClellan sat beside me, calm and composed as ever, her eyes scanning the room like a seasoned general. Across from us, Grant adjusted his tie with stiff fingers. Kayla was glued to her phone, tapping away, not even pretending to care. I could feel it. The moment was close. They thought I had agreed to this dinner as a quiet handover, a formality, a gesture of goodwill. Kayla even had the audacity to whisper to Grant earlier that morning, saying they should order champagne for the toast. Let them drink their illusions. The servers brought out the main course: grilled salmon, truffle risotto, roasted carrots with rosemary. I barely touched mine. My appetite had long since been replaced by resolve. Grant clinked his knife gently on the rim of his glass and stood. Everyone turned. Even Kayla looked up. He cleared his throat and began with something rehearsed. Something about legacy, about transitions, about gratitude. I let him speak. I let him feel in control for the very last time. Then he gestured toward me. My mother has always been a force, independent, tireless, wise beyond measure. And tonight, as we begin this new chapter for our family's legacy, we honor her for all she's built. McClellan turned her face slightly toward me. I nodded. It was time. I stood slowly, pressing my napkin flat on the table before setting it aside. "Thank you, Grant," I said, calm as glass. "And thank you all for being here. I know this dinner means a great deal to you." Grant smiled, the way a man does when he thinks the world is already in his pocket. "I've thought a lot about legacy these past few weeks, about what it means, to leave something behind. Not just property or numbers in a bank account, but meaning, direction, dignity." Kayla shifted in her seat. I saw the flicker of tension in her jaw. "I realized," I continued, "that it was never about keeping things in the family, but about keeping things in the right hands." Grant's smile faltered. "I had a meeting last week with the board of directors, and with my legal team. Effective immediately, the controlling shares of Whitaker Solutions are no longer tied to family bloodlines." The silence cracked like ice underfoot. Grant's face went rigid. Kayla's fingers froze mid-tap. "The company," I said, "has been restructured into a charitable trust. Its profits will fund scholarships for women over 60 returning to school, housing grants for female veterans, and small business seed funds for grandmothers raising children alone." Grant leaned forward, his voice low, cold. "You gave away the company." I didn't look at him. I looked at McClellan. "Yes," I said. "I did." Kayla stood, nearly knocking over her glass. Her voice was sharp. "You're joking. You have to be." McClellan remained seated, calm, folding her napkin in her lap. "You should read the paperwork. It's quite thorough." Grant's mouth opened, then shut. For once, he had no argument prepared. "I spent years believing legacy was about name and blood," I said. "But blood betrayed me. Name tried to erase me, so I chose something stronger." I pulled a slim envelope from my clutch and slid it across the table toward Grant. "That's your severance. You're no longer employed by the foundation, nor is Kayla." His hand trembled as he opened it. I had chosen the number carefully, enough to prevent legal wrangling, but not enough to buy forgiveness. Kayla made a sound like a scoff, choked on pride. "You've lost your mind." McClellan stood at last, her posture unshakable. "No," she said quietly. "She's finally come back to it." I let the silence stretch. Every woman at that table, whether server, guest, or friend, felt something shift in the air. Not vengeance, Not fury, but justice. And it was quiet. It was clean. Grant stared at the envelope as if it held a death certificate. Maybe, in a way, it did. The death of his entitlement, the burial of his control. He finally stood, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. "This is how you repay us," he muttered. I looked at him one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. "No, this is how I save myself." I turned to McClellan. "Shall we?" We left the room together, two women who had carried too much for too long, finally putting down the weight. As the door shut behind us, I didn't look back. There would be tears behind that door, maybe yelling, maybe threats, but not my tears, not anymore. The air outside was cool and dry, a breeze tugging gently at the edges of my shawl. McClellan took a deep breath, then smiled. Not broadly, not theatrically, just enough to say, "Well done." I nodded. I had lost a son tonight, but I had found something else. Myself. And I was finally free. The days that followed the confrontation were quieter than I expected. Not quiet like before, when silence was a sign of being erased. This was different. The air felt clean, like something sour had finally been flushed out. There was no apology from Brendan, no knock on the door, no teary message. Just an absence, a void where the storm used to live. I didn't chase after it. That morning, I brewed coffee just for myself, sat at the small breakfast table, and for the first time in a long while, read the paper cover to cover without checking my phone. The headlines screamed about the board shake-up, speculations about asset restructuring, a short paragraph noting I had stepped down. My name in print felt strangely impersonal, and yet I smiled, because no one else got to write my ending. Later that week, I returned to the community library, where I used to volunteer before Alan's death. The director, Liz, remembered me. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and dust and said they were short-staffed. I told her I wasn't looking for sympathy. She said good, because she wasn't offering any, just a place to put my energy. I said yes. The room they gave me was small and sunlit, with a window facing the elementary school across the street. Every afternoon, I could hear the sound of kids pouring out the doors, full of questions and sugar and untamed laughter. I didn't need to speak. Just hearing it filled something in me I didn't know was still hollow. One afternoon, while organizing the shelves, I found an old copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. The edges were frayed, the pages yellowed. I hadn't touched that book since Brendan was 6, maybe 7. I used to read it to him before bed. He'd lean against me, thumb in his mouth, asking if being real really did hurt the way the book said. I'd answer softly then, telling him becoming real meant loving even when it wasn't safe. I didn't know then that I was reading that story to myself too. I didn't cry. I just closed the book gently, slid it back on the shelf, and stood still for a while. Not in sadness, not in longing, just in acknowledgement. The house felt different now. Not haunted, not bitter, just mine again. The guest bedroom remained untouched. No folded linens, no prepped towels. There was no reason to keep a space for someone who had made it clear I was never welcome in theirs. I donated the old clothes, boxed up mementos that no longer carried warmth, and kept only what made me feel rooted. In the backyard, I started a small vegetable garden. Nothing fancy. Just tomatoes, zucchini, and a stubborn rosemary bush that refused to die no matter how many winters tried. Every morning, I'd check their leaves, pinch off what was brown, coax the rest toward the light. It became ritual, simple, restorative. One Saturday, while buying compost at the local nursery, I ran into Monica, Brendan's ex-wife. She looked surprised but not ashamed, just older, tired in the eyes. She asked if I was doing all right. I said yes. She nodded. Then, with a tight voice, she said she wished things had turned out different. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to fix between us, and nothing left to break either. The final papers came in the mail. Legal closure. McClellan had handled everything with precision. The foundation I had funded in Alan's name was now officially active, with its own staff and mission board. Its first scholarships were set to launch that fall, helping women aged 50 and older return to school or retrain for careers they were once told they were too old to try. I had requested the first round be anonymous. The point wasn't to have my name carved into a plaque. The point was to carve space for others. I kept the letter from the foundation's director in a small box on my desk. She had written about a woman who cried during orientation, saying this was the first time someone had believed in her in years. That was enough. As for Brendan, I hadn't seen him since that night in the conference room. Rumours swirled, as they do. He had stepped down from his position, citing personal reasons. Some said he had moved out of state. Others said he was attempting to rebuild his reputation. I had no interest in confirming either. Forgiveness wasn't something I handed out like loose change, but I also wasn't carrying his betrayal like luggage anymore. It no longer weighed me down. It simply existed, like a scar after healing, still visible, but no longer tender. On the evening of my 76th birthday, I sat on the back porch with a glass of red wine, the sky burning soft orange. I didn't throw a party. I didn't want gifts, just stillness and peace. I watched the wind rustle the rosemary bush, smelled the tomatoes ripening under the sun's last breath, and let myself feel full. Not with revenge, not with victory, but with enough. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or replaced by those you once held close, I want you to know this. You are not defined by the way they discarded you. You are not broken just because they couldn't see your worth. Sometimes, the quiet rebuilding is the most powerful act of all. If this story stirred something in you, I invite you to stay a little longer, to share your thoughts, or simply sit with the message. You are seen, you are not alone, and your healing does not need permission to begin.